So in my many years of living in Poland, there are two topics, I should say, that I've noticed appear in the news from time to time, and then they disappear and they come back over and over and over. And at this point, I'm convinced that it's always going to be like this. We will never see the end of these two things. Now, they're both related to World War II, and I'll mention the first thing quickly, but the second thing on my short list is the focus of this video. The first thing that happens over and over is that some politician or somebody famous outside of Poland calls Auschwitz a Polish death camp. Now, they don't do this to offend Poland. That's not the point. They're doing it out of laziness or ignorance. Barack Obama, among many others, has done this. And when this happens, the Polish media goes into outrage mode and Polish politicians attack whoever said it. And we've seen this 1,000 times. Now, I'm not blaming Poland for this. I'm just saying it's one of those Groundhog Day things where it happens over and over and over. And I don't think it's ever going to stop. Now, the other thing on my list, the thing that happens over and over and over, is Polish demands for reparations from Germany for World War II. So in this episode of Polska po angielsku, we're going to take a look at this topic and what you need to know to understand why this is a subject that will never go away. So before I continue, just a quick reminder that I want to build a community channel here on Polska po angielsku. So that means I not only welcome your feedback, but you can appear here on the channel with me if you want to, if you have some kind of special area of knowledge or expertise or something to share that would be of interest regarding life in Poland, reach out to me. We'll see if we can make it happen. Just follow Polska po angielsku on Facebook. You can message me there. Okay, so January 27th is International Holocaust Remembrance Day because that's when the Soviet Red Army liberated the Auschwitz concentration camp in 1945. A ceremony is always held at Auschwitz on that day, and high-ranking officials from the Polish government always attend. At this year's event, just a few days ago, as I'm recording this, Polish President Karol Nawrocki used the occasion to renew Polish demands for reparations from Germany for World War II. Nawrocki was previously the director of the World War II Museum in Gdańsk, and so he is arguably more knowledgeable about this topic than many other Polish politicians, and so his demands for reparation carry some element of credibility. Just a few years ago, before Nawrocki was president, his party, the Law and Justice Party, backed a demand for almost $1.5 trillion in reparations from Germany. Not surprisingly, Germany rejected that claim, as it always does. So Nawrocki's recent comments are the latest chapter in a story that never ends. The subject might disappear from time to time, but you can be sure that the topic of reparations from Germany will always resurface at some point. But let's go back to the beginning of this story and look at the history of this never-ending conflict. So it's important to remember that it's not like the idea of reparations only came up years after the war. The topic of reparations was on the agenda at the Potsdam Conference, which was held just 2 months after the war in Europe ended. And that is where Poland's problems started, because Poland did not have a seat at the table at the Potsdam Conference, and instead was represented, if that's the right word, by the Soviets, which is to say by Joseph Stalin. Because the agreement they came to at Potsdam was that all Polish claims to reparations would be paid out of the reparations that the Soviet Union was demanding from Germany. Remember, the Soviets lost 20 million people in the war and suffered physical destruction that we can't even imagine, and they had their own claims for compensation from Germany. For the Soviets, Polish claims to compensation were not a priority, and the Soviets controlled any compensation that Poland might receive. So you can see where this is going. And so Poland got basically nothing, while the Soviets enthusiastically took their reparations from East Germany in the form of machinery, raw materials, factories, trains, and things like that. Because that's exactly what the Potsdam Agreement allowed, that the occupying powers would take their reparations in the form of things. In the case of the Soviet Union, that territory was East Germany, and so the Soviets literally dismantled entire factories and train tracks and more and took it all back home. I mention this because this form of reparations complicated the Soviets' so-called payments to Poland. Remember that the Soviet Union assumed responsibility for Poland's reparations claims, And they settled those claims in much the same way they got their own reparations, in the form of stuff. But whereas the Soviets were taking useful physical assets from East Germany, the Soviets were paying Poland in the form of random bizarre things like 7 million copies of the works of Karl Marx, which were counted as a form of reparations from the Germans. Now, this is also connected to the next big event in the history of the reparations discussion, because the Soviets took so much from East Germany, so many crucial physical assets, that the East German economy started to collapse. The result was increasing social unrest in the country, and in 1953, East German workers revolted against the government. The Soviets suppressed the uprising with tanks, but they knew that East Germany was collapsing, mostly because they themselves had stolen so many things that were needed for the East German economy. To stabilize the situation, the Soviets decided to stop taking everything. Joseph Stalin had died earlier that year, and the new Soviet leadership strongly pressured its satellite states, like Poland, to get in line and drop their demands for reparations, because if they didn't, it would bankrupt East Germany, which the Soviets needed as a stable buffer zone against the West. So, to keep East Germany stable and to save it from collapse, the other nations of the Eastern Bloc had to do their part. The result was that Poland was forced to sign a waiver that stated that it dropped all claims for reparations against Germany. Now, obviously, Poland did not want to do this, and signing this waiver was like signing a contract with a gun to your head. But to this day, modern unified Germany insists that the waiver is still valid, and it's a big part of their claim that today there is no legal basis for Polish reparations for the war. Poland still insists today that the 1953 agreement was never valid because it was done under Soviet force. And on top of that, the agreement said nothing about West Germany. But the German response today is still too bad, so sad. In the following years, after 1953, mostly in the 1970s, the German state made many payments to individual people in Poland who had suffered personally, usually as a slave laborer during the war. But the payments were always called humanitarian aid rather than reparations. So in 1991, the reunified Germany established a fund of 500 million Deutschmarks. That's about $700 million today. The money was used to compensate victims of Nazi aggression. But again, this is 1991, 50 years after the war. And so most of those victims were already dead. So let's move to 2004, when the Polish parliament approved a landmark resolution. Prompted by claims from German groups who were demanding the return of property in Poland, Poland retaliated by officially stating that Poland had not received adequate reparations and called on the German government to take action. This was the first time the 1953 waiver was formally challenged in the post-communist democratic era. But again, Germany said no, and the issue of reparations mostly remained quiet until 2022, when the Polish government issued their demand for $1.5 trillion that I mentioned earlier. Germany again said no, and that's basically where we are today. Let's change the perspective here for a moment and look at things from Germany's point of view. Now, I know that most people are not sympathetic to the German point of view on this topic, but I think it's worth looking at their reasoning behind their position on the subject of reparations. First is the legal angle to the topic, which I've already covered. The 1953 waiver is the important part here, and Germany still says that this is a binding international document. Germany rejects the idea that the document was forced by the Soviets, and they believe that reopening the topic would destabilize the entire post-war legal order. Germany also points to the fact that during the 1990 political process of its reunification and negotiations with America, France, the UK, and Russia, no further claims were raised by Poland, effectively silencing the issue under international law. On top of that, although this is not an official part of their case, Germans will point out that Poland received significant former German territories after the war: Silesia, Pomerania, parts of East Prussia, and Germany views these territorial losses as a major form of compensation. Yes, I know. Poland lost territories in the East. You don't have to tell me. But Germany's response to that is go talk to the Russians. They took it. The loss of Germany's former eastern part, including the major cities of Gdańsk and Wrocław and Poznan, was a very painful thing for them. And they see it, again, as I said, as a massive form of reparations for Poland that they have already paid. Again, that's the German position. I'm just giving you the facts. But there's more. Financially, Germany has been paying for decades. There have never been state-to-state reparations, but there have been plenty of payments from the German government to individuals. I mentioned earlier in the 1970s, there were lots of payments. In 1991, they set up this fund. And so lots of individual people in Poland have received de facto reparations, even if they were called humanitarian payments. And one more thing, Germany was Poland's most vocal supporter when it was time for NATO membership and EU membership. And many Germans believe that was a kind of reparations because while they cannot pay for the past with cash, they can promote Poland's security and development today. Yes, I know. Germany wants credit for helping to solve the problems that they created. I understand. You can make your own decision on that. And one more thing, you have to remember that there is basically no political appetite for paying reparations in Germany. Even the most left-wing parties are afraid that paying Poland would open a Pandora's box because there are like 10 or 15 more countries that would demand their own reparations if Germany agreed to pay Poland. Like I said, I'm just presenting both sides here so you can get an idea of why nothing happens on this issue. So that's how it goes, back and forth forever. The arguments about moral debts and legal debts and historical rights and wrongs will probably never end. Reviving the topic on the Polish side and refusing to engage on the topic on the German side is basically a reflection of the political realities in the two countries. In opinion polls, about 40 to 50% of Polish people, too many polls here, support the idea of reparations from Germany, even though zero progress has been made on the topic in 70 years. But that means that some Polish politicians see some benefit in making this part of their platform. On the other side, in Germany, maybe 10% of voters support the idea of reparations, and so German politicians see no need to change their position, especially when Poland is demanding $1.5 trillion, which is about 3 times the entire German government budget for this year. Another reason this is never going to happen. As an outsider myself, I sympathize with Polish claims to reparations, but I also believe that if it hasn't happened by now, it's never going to happen. I mean, today we're just 13 years away from the 100th anniversary of the start of the war. That's ancient history by today's standards. Poles can't accept that there will be no final justice for what happened. For them, it's about the moral argument. Germans can't accept that 21st century tax money will be paid for 1940s crimes, especially when they already feel they have paid for these crimes. For them, it's about the legal argument. I don't see any solution here. Do you? And by the way, I've always wondered why Poland never demands compensation from Russia. If Poland can put a price tag on 6 years of intense hell during the war, can it put a price tag on 45 years of being on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain because of the Russians? I think it can. How much is that? It's certainly more than $1.5 trillion. You can tell me what you think in the comments. Okay, so that's our look at reparations from Germany for the events of the war. Again, let me know what you think. Complicated subject. Please like and subscribe if you like what we're doing here at Polsko Po Angielsku. And we'll see you next time.